Hello again. So this time, the book we're going to read is called The Wisest Man in the World by Benjamin Elkin, and it's illustrated by Anita Lobel, one of my favorite illustrators. I really love her work. So this is about a very wise king, and I love to read to my dogs. They just give me a lot of peace and happiness. This is Daisy. So this is the inset for this book, which I think is really beautiful. And there's a bee with some flowers. And the bee has a special part in this book. So this is a legend of ancient Israel, the wisest man in the world. All right. Can you see the pages? All right. So in days of old, so it is said, a little bee strayed into the palace of the great King Solomon. The angry servants ran to trap it, but the bee escaped from them and flew to the king for safety. Now this king was the wisest man in the world. So wise was he that he spoke the language of every living thing, of beasts and of fowl, of creeping things and of fishes. Mercy, O king, pleaded the bee. Spare me today that I may live to serve you tomorrow. King Solomon smiled to think that this tiny creature could ever hope to serve a mighty monarch. But he drew the curtain and gently released the bee with his own hand. Go in peace, he said. I require no service in return. So he let the bee go. Through the open curtain, the king saw a great caravan. There were hundreds of camels bedecked in gold. There were apes and peacocks, lions and tigers on jeweled leashes. And at the head of the caravan rode the proud and beautiful Queen of Sheba. The queen and her counselors had traveled for many weeks over the vast desert to visit the king. King Solomon had long been expecting these visitors. He sent a group of nobles to escort them into the palace. Whoa, look at that throne. Dressed in his royal robes, the king seated himself upon his throne. Now this was a most wondrous throne indeed. It was of ivory covered with gold and precious jewels. Overhead was a golden candlestick with 7 branches on each side. All around, hanging crystals flashed their rainbow colors and tinkled like heavenly harps. And most marvelous of all were the 2 golden lions and golden eagles, which stood on either side of the 6 steps leading up to the throne. For these golden lions and eagles would permit no one to lie to the king. If anyone dared to tell an untruth, the lions would roar and the eagles would scream. When the Queen of Sheba entered, she could not hide her surprise at King Solomon's splendor. May the king live forever, she said. I come to offer you the true friendship of my country. At once the golden lions roared and the eagles screamed. For the Queen of Sheba spoke falsely. She had not come as a true friend. But knowing naught of the lions and eagles, the queen graciously bowed. To her ears, this was another royal salute. In truth, she had long been jealous of King Solomon's fame, and in this visit she hoped to shame him before his own people. During the next few days, the Queen of Sheba did her best to prove that her host was not really wise. She tested his wisdom with difficult riddles, but all of them he readily answered. Once the queen brought to him a large diamond which had a curved, twisting hole. Is it within your power to draw a thread through a winding hole? She asked. King Solomon smiled and sent for a silkworm. The worm crawled through the hole, drawing a thread of silk right through it. Another time, the queen sent in 60 little boys and girls, all dressed alike. If it pleases your majesty, she said, tell me from your throne which are the boys and which are the girls. To his servants, King Solomon said, place a basin of water before each of the children and bid them wash their faces. The boys splashed water on their faces, and the girls dabbed the water with their fingertips, and so the king could easily tell them apart. I don't know, I might splash water on my face. Once the king and queen saw a little dog had fallen into a deep pool. The water was so low the dog could not be reached. King Solomon tossed a branch into the water for the dog to cling to. I would not have done so, said the queen. It is better to drown speedily than to starve slowly. And she and her counselors were happy that the king had at last done something unwise. But the king did not stop to reply. He showed his men how to block the nearby stream with rocks. As the stream overflowed into the pool, the water rose higher and higher. Soon the branch floated up within reach, and the dog was safely lifted out. At night, the Queen of Sheba met with her counselors. "Thus far, we have had no success," they said. "Tomorrow will be our final chance. The king has invited guests from many lands to a banquet in my honor. For this banquet, we must find a trick for which it will show them that King Solomon is not wise." "Such a trick we have found, your majesty," said her counselors. From King Solomon's garden, the counselors plucked a flower. They ordered their craftsmen to make 99 false flowers exactly like it, and then they placed just one fresh flower among the 99. The copies were so perfect, the Queen of Sheba herself could not point out the real one. "Well done," said the queen. "King Solomon will surely pick a false flower as coming fresh from his own garden. By tonight, he will be a joke among all the nations." A gardener heard this and reported the story to the king. But King Solomon had become so proud and so confident he refused to be concerned. "It matters not," he said. "It suits me well that they should prove my wisdom before the multitude. I fear not what they may do." That night, the palace gleamed with light as hundreds of guests came to honor King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. At just the right moment, the queen said, "Your gracious majesty, our craftsmen beg you to judge their work. Among these flowers, only one comes from your garden. The others have been created by my servants in your honor. Won't you select your own flower and let my servants know how theirs compare?" At first, the king was confident of his ability to choose, but when he sniffed the flowers, they were all equally fragrant. He felt them and they were all petal smooth. In beautiful color and in appearance, they were identical. Uh-oh. Perhaps this was a trick and all of the flowers were false. Then he would be wrong no matter which one he selected. Never had King Solomon believed that he could be entrapped before his guests. As he stood there, puzzled, the guests began to whisper. What was wrong? Couldn't the king even pick out his own flower from his own garden? Perhaps he was not so wise after all. Even his loyal servants became nervous. Why did not the king make his choice and stop this foolish whispering among the guests? No. Then King Solomon felt something tickle his hand. A little bee had landed there. "I am at your service, your majesty," whispered the bee. It circled low over the flowers. Then it crawled into the one flower which had honey inside. No one else had seen the little bee. King Solomon leaned over and plucked out the one flower with the bee in it, the one flower which had actually grown in his garden. "Yes," said the king, "your craftsmen are indeed skilled. I have been admiring their work, but the false cannot be true. The others are false, and only this one is true." The queen checked for the craftsman's secret mark and then bowed low. Truly, this was the single genuine flower. As the audience applauded, the queen was finally convinced. The very next day, the Queen of Sheba and her counselors signed a treaty of true friendship with King Solomon, and then they left for home bearing many rich gifts. Later, in the quiet of his rooms, King Solomon thought gratefully of the little bee which had served him so well. He humbly bowed his head. "I have been too proud," he thought. "None is so great that he needs no help, and none is so small that he cannot give it." Surely, wisdom is given to all living things, and the tiniest creatures are teachers of kings. There's the little bee. All right, so the art project for this book, The Wisest Man in the World, is any scene that's your favorite from the book. And this is kind of a fun puzzle you can do for others. So we made these flowers. They look like kind of tomatoes. But they are flowers, kind of abstract flowers. And your task is to try to find the bee among these flowers. Can you find the bee in there? It's kind of in the middle, kind of up high. There it is. So for your art project for this book, what you can do is draw a whole field of flowers. These are kind of floating lotuses on a lake. Draw a whole bunch of flowers, and then you're going to hide your little bee in the flowers, and then you're going to give this puzzle to someone in your family. So your brother or your father or your mother, ask them if they can find the little tiny bee that you hid in that field or that lake of lotus flowers or poppies. So if you want, you can go ahead and try this art project. Make a whole bunch of flowers with anything you have in your house, a pencil, a crayon, a marker, and then pose the puzzle to someone in your house. Can you find the bee that's hidden in the flowers?